It began with a sound that shouldn't exist on a paved street, an almost taste of metal in the air, followed by a soft, wet clicking like someone chewing on gravel. I remember stopping mid-step and looking back because my body knows the difference between imagination and something breathing where it has no right to breathe. I live on a block where the streetlights hum the same tired tune every night, and the houses breathe out the day's leftover heat. It was one of those nights, the kind that makes the asphalt smell like old coffee and rain that never fell. I had walked this route 100 times, headphones off because I wanted to feel the city's small, honest noises. The distant train, a dog's loose bark, a loose shutter clapping in the wind. That night, those noises were all accounted for, and then there was an extra sound. A rhythm that matched my steps but lagged a fraction behind, like a shadow learning to walk. At first, I told myself it was kids trying to scare me, a neighbor's cat knocking over a trash can. The usual explanations rusted into place. Then I saw it crouched under the weak circle of a street lamp, 2 blocks behind me. People don't crouch like that in the middle of the street. They don't tuck their knees under their chin and sit like a half-formed thought. The lamp washed it in the color of old film, pale, crackled skin, mottled with darker patches like burn marks that refused to heal. Its face was a hole filled with teeth and white eyes rimmed with black, huge and rolling, and not reflecting the world so much as swallowing it. I should have turned and run, but the air had thickened into something tactile, an oil-slick coolness that clung to my throat. My mouth filled with the coppery taste of fear. My phone in my pocket felt uselessly small. I kept walking, because walking keeps you from admitting to yourself you're running. With every step, the clicking got louder, closer. It was synchronized in a way that made my chest ache, as if something were counting my heartbeats. When I glanced at a storefront window for reassurance, my reflection was perfect, except for the slight delay, like a poor reception on an old television. The reflection blinked a fraction slower than I did. Behind it, just out of frame, something shifted. A pale shoulder, a flash of teeth. I felt the hairs rise along my arms as if the street's warmth had given way to a draft coming from under the world. A few doors down, someone had dumped an old child's toy on the steps, its plastic eyes gouged out and replaced with a smear of something dark. I crouched to inspect it, the same motion I would later recall and hate. Small vandalism, I told myself. But the toy had tiny scratch marks on the back, as if it had been dragged. And trailing away from it, nearly invisible in the gutter, were prints, elongated, knobby toes splayed in an impossible pattern like someone who had practiced walking on all fours. That's when the streetlight above me flickered, not in the gentle way of failing bulbs, but with a deliberate stutter. And for a heartbeat, I saw the creature looking directly at me, head cocked, as if it had been waiting for consent. I kept moving because motion felt like bargaining. Each step was a promise to myself that I would outrun whatever etiquette of wrongness had learned to match my pace. The creature didn't run. It adjusted. The clicking became a wet, patient cadence, less like chewing gravel, and more like a tongue exploring the spaces between teeth. It learned the rhythm of my breathing and synchronized with it, like a parasite tuning a host to its own heartbeat. When I ducked into the small deli under the corner light, I expected the fluorescent hum to offer refuge. Instead, the bell over the door clipped a staccato note and then fell mute. The clerk kept slicing meat with a mechanical calm, as if she hadn't heard anything at all. I realized then that the world around me had 2 settings, the normal and a thin, fragile layer where my reality had been altered. People walked through it blind. I could feel the layer under my skin, as if someone had peeled a membrane back and left a raw, humming place exposed. I spent the next day checking for rational damage. I measured the distance between my front door and the street. I checked locks. I slept with lights on and woke with new scratches stitched across my forearm. Thin, neat lines like someone had practiced writing my name in a hurry. My phone filled with missed calls from unknown numbers that, when played back, were only a long, low static with a pattern I could not parse at first. When I slowed the audio, the static bent into something else. My own voice, stretched and patient, whispering, "Walk." I told myself I was tired. I told myself the city had finally hollowed me out. But denial is a fragile thing when something learns the shape of your life. The next night, the creature was not crouched under a lamp. It had learned to fold itself into corners, to collect in the shadows beneath stoops and under cars, and to press its face to glass so it looked like someone standing on the sidewalk. It used silhouettes. No, it used suggestion. To point at things I had to look at. The window where my neighbor kept a framed photograph of a beach, the closed curtains that never moved. If I fixed my gaze too long on the glass, the eyes swimming there would stop being empty and start being hungry, as if that blackness were a mouth waiting to be fed. I stopped telling anyone. How do you explain that the reflection in a shop window blinked wrong? How do you explain finding a child's toy dragged into a doorway and your name scratched on the underside of its plastic face? I began to feel the creature inside my own skull, an echo that wasn't thought, but an imprint, footfalls recorded in the bones behind my ears, a pattern I felt in my teeth when I chewed. The apartment did not keep me safe. It let me sit in the same chair and pretend the smell of bleach masked everything. That was the lie the city told itself. At 3 in the morning, I woke because my bedroom light, which I never left on overnight, was shading the curtains in a way that made them look like hands. There was a sound from under the bed, a careful, scraping drag, punctuated by the same wet clicking. I realized with a cold clarity that the prints I had seen in the gutter were not meant for the street alone. Something small had learned to move through my apartment the way a stain moves through fabric. I held my breath and listened to it map my bones. Then it made a sound that I had not heard before, a soft, surprised intake, like someone tasting air for the first time. The sound was followed by a slow, deliberate laugh. It was my laugh. I tried to leave. For a while, I believed leaving would be the logic that fixed things. A train ticket, a bag shoved under my arm, the way a new skyline can make you feel like a different person. I packed with hands that trembled but obeyed routine, socks, wallet, keys, because routine is armor. The apartment was quieter than it had any right to be. The refrigerator hummed on a single thin note that made the plaster behind my ears ring. Outside, the street kept its indifferent buzz, but everything useful had been hollowed out of it. The lights looked like staged suns. On the stairs, someone had placed a handful of my photographs face down. They were not my photographs anymore, not just images, but small portals of time I could no longer touch. Pictures of birthdays, of a dog that folded like a blanket in the sun, of me, smiling in a way that felt like someone else's costume. The photos were warm, as if they had been pressed recently. When I bent to pick one up, my skin crawled, not from cold, but from the sense of a surface being red. On the back, in a shaky, neat hand that matched nothing I knew, were 2 words, "Stay still." I got to the car and drove without really seeing the road. The city blurred into smeared sodium lights and the motor's low whine. I checked mirrors like a man checking for cracks in his own forehead. In the rear view, the back seat looked empty. But in the glass of the passenger window, on the edge of the frame, a shape had learned to mimic the tremor of my hands on the wheel. It was small at first, just the suggestion of a shoulder, but it grew with each mile like mold spreading on wet plaster. Every time I turned to look directly into the glass, the thing flattened itself into a photograph of someone else and then flexed its teeth. At a red light, I watched my reflection, and the reflection watched me back as if we were 2 reluctant conspirators. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, and the sound that came out was not my cry but the creature's translation, a soft, expectant syllable that matched the rhythm it had taught my breathing. Heads turned. The light changed. The city took its chance to assert the ordinary again. I drove faster, but speed only stretched the distance between me and a different kind of capture. It was catching up in the spaces speed creates. When I finally stopped because my legs would no longer carry me, and because the engine's heat had become a furnace, I felt it climb across my spine like someone ironed a cold seam. It crawled up my neck and into my mouth, not by force, but by invitation. It had learned the shape of my voice, the little habits that make a nickname sound like a home. I heard it say my name, and in that syllable, every secret I had ever swallowed unspooled. The last thing I remember before the city reclaimed its normal noises was the way the creature tested me like a coin in a pocket. It weighed me, rolled me, and then decided whether I would be kept whole or folded. It chose something quieter. It speaks now when I don't want it to. It knows my voice.
subscribe to Horror Story Bar.